Hello everyone, this is Reza Dorrani. In today's PowerApps video, I will show you how we can create multilingual apps. I will showcase a couple of different options, one in which we can use the Microsoft Translator connector to translate our text in our PowerApps to any language of our choice, or we can create our own localization file. We can just create our text in one language and then create our translations using Power Automate flows. That way, we can dynamically create our translations, and not just that, we can also dynamically refer that file directly in our Power App. So let's get started with the video, but first, my introduction. Here's a Power App that I created from the help desk template. And this app allows you to log in with two different personas, a help desk user persona and an admin persona. As a user, I can come into this application and create help desk tickets. And from an admin perspective, I can log into the app, look at all the tickets that have been created, change the status to in progress, define how much % of the work for this ticket is completed, assign this ticket to a user. Then I can just go ahead and click update and the status changes to in progress. Now I've taken this existing template and I've gone ahead and made it multilingual. And the way I've made this multilingual is currently I'm providing a couple of languages, English and Spanish. So by default, it's picking up the English language and I can change this to Spanish and my entire app converts to the Spanish language based on the translations that I have provided. So here's the user logging into the application. As you can see, all of the labels and controls have localized themselves to the Spanish language. The data that's coming from my data source won't be localized. That's still in the base language that I created them in. But overall, from a user perspective, I can see that the entire language of the app has been transformed. And this is true even for the screens related to the admin persona. Let's try and understand some key concepts related to building multilingual apps. Now, first thing what we need to do is try and figure out what's the language that the user is currently accessing the app in. And to grab the language of the user, in PowerApps, we have a language function. And what the language function returns is the language script and region of the current logged in user. And this information it gets from the language that you've set in your browser. And the language tag returns information in three different formats. The first format is where it will give you a 2-character abbreviation of the language and then a 2-character abbreviation of the locale or your region. Or it could give us the 2-character abbreviation for the language. It could also give us 2-character abbreviation for the language, then the script, and then the region. Now to leverage this function in PowerApps, text for this label, I will go ahead and use that language function. It's an inbuilt native PowerFX function in PowerApps. And if I preview my app now, you see the language returns en-us. So that's the language and that's the locale. Now this information it is grabbing from my browser settings. I will head over to the settings of my browser, go to languages, and here I have set up my languages. Now, in my case, I have English. That's the first language that I've set up here. If I want to add additional languages, let's say I want to add Spanish. So I'm going to add the Spanish language and make sure this sits right at the top. And now I'm just launching this app. As we can see, the language that it is picking up right here from my browser now is Spanish. So that's one way of grabbing the language information for the logged in user. There is another way as well. The preferred language from the user's profile. So what we can do right here is use the Office 365 users connector. I will use the My Profile version 2 function, and in this we have preferred language. Now this will go and grab my preferred language from my Microsoft 365 account. And as you can see right here, it's picked en-us again. And where do I set this as a user? If I click on my profile here and go to view account, and if I head to settings and privacy, right here is where I can define my language. Now, how do we make the text in our app multilingual? So let's take an example of this label here that says welcome. Now we have a connector called Microsoft Translator. So if I go to data sources and go to add data and search for translator, we have two options here, Microsoft Translator and Microsoft Translator V2, which is currently in preview. When you create a connection to the service, you can specify an API key, a subscription key. So for example, in Azure, I have set up cognitive services here and I have an API key here for the translation service that I can leverage. However, you can also leave the key blank so that it uses an internal shared key. And there are limits to how many characters can be translated per day, how many requests can be made per minute, and some other general limits and throttling limits that you need to be aware of. I'm going to pick the Microsoft Translator one here. Don't need to provide a subscription key if you're using the shared one, so I'll just click connect. And I have this right here. And how do we use this? Here I have the text welcome. Instead of this, I'm going to say Microsoft Translator dot translate. It's asking me for the text that I want to translate. So I'll put the original text, which is welcome. And I want to translate this to which language? Give me the code. So let's say Spanish. It will now translate welcome to Spanish. Can change this to any other language by just changing the code. So I want to change this to French or change this to Hindi. So we can use this translator connection, but if I was to apply this to every label in my app or every control in my app where I want to define translated text, you could quickly hit those throttling limits related to that connector. So if not the translator service, what other options do we have? If I head back to the documentation around language, they've actually given a really good example here of how you can create an Excel file and maintain your own localized text per language. So for example here, it has a simple table that has the text ID, a language tag, and then the localized text associated with it. And there are some really good pointers that they've provided here around what you need to think about when designing and using this localized table. Now, in order for us to create this localized table, all we need to do is open up Excel, and all I've done here is literally just mimicked the pattern of this table, which is text ID, language tag, and localized text. And here I'm defining my IDs. This is that unique key that I will query in this Excel file, check the user's language, let's say it's English, and then grab the text. So if I need something similar for Spanish, all I have to do here in the same table at the bottom here is enter that same ID, change the language to Spanish, and put the Spanish equivalent of this text right here. So for my app, which is my help desk app, I went through all the controls, grabbed all the text that I wanted to translate, placed them all in localized text, set the language tag to the English code, which is EN, and then gave all of these a unique identity in the Excel file. The key when you're working with Excel and PowerApps is you have to create a table. So ensure that you're adding this as a table. The next thing we need is to define all the languages that your app is going to support. So let's say I want to support Spanish as a second language for my app. In that case, I need the data for all of these in Spanish as well. Now, one way is I can add all of this manually. However, I'll show you an easier way. We will leverage Flow. So I'll go to Flow, and here I'll create an instant cloud flow that I will manually trigger. And for this flow, I'll add an input parameter of type text. I'm going to call this my language tag that the user will provide. Next, I will try and connect to my Excel file. Now, I'm going to store my Excel file in OneDrive so I can quickly connect to it in Flow. So in my OneDrive, I'll go and upload that file. So I've just added my file right here. Go back to Flow. Use the Excel Online Business Connector. Use the list rows present in a table function. So I need to loop through all the rows in my table. So I'm going to pick this. The location for my Excel file. Just open the drop down. Pick OneDrive for Business. For the document library, pick OneDrive. And for the file, go to the Show Picker control here and pick your Excel file. That's my localization file that I created that only has the English translations right now. And here is where I have to go and pick the table. Now, very important, you create a table in Excel. So I have that and I called it localization. So I'm going to pick that table right here. And I will also head over to Show Advanced Options and add a very simple filter query. I want to get only the data that has the language tag as EN. So my filter query will be language tag equals EN. Next, what I need to do is for each of these rows, so I'll use the apply to each loop and run through the dynamic content value from the list rows present in a table action. And within this, I'll go and add an action to translate the text. Now here is where I can use the translation service. Why? Because this flow is going to run once per language and just go and set all the text for me in that localized Excel file. So here I will use the Microsoft Translator. From the V2 action, I have translate text. I'm going to pick this. For the target language, in the trigger of my flow, I already have this parameter that I added. So I will just go here and right at the bottom, go and select enter custom value and pick the language tag that I'm passing from my flow trigger. Important you pick the right value here. So that's the language tag. And for the text that I want to translate, that I will get from the column localized text in my Excel file. So that's right here, localized text. So this will translate it. And next I need to add a row in my Excel file for the translated text. So I'll go to Excel Online Business again. And here, look for add a row into a table. Once again, select OneDrive for Business, OneDrive, pick the file, which is localization, pick the table, which is again localization in my case. And here I have all those three columns opened up. So the text ID, remember I want to keep the ID exactly the same. So I'll just pick it from list rows present in a table, which is the original action that we called. So I'll just pick that. For the language tag, I will pick the language tag that's coming in from my trigger. And for the localized text, I will pick the text from the translation service. That's the translated text. I'll name my flow, click save. And now I can take advantage of this flow to create those translations for me rather than me manually translating them. And this is using the Microsoft Translation Service. So I'll click test, go to manual and test this flow. Click continue. Here I can define my language tag. I'll put the language code for Spanish, run the flow. The flow will now trigger. The flow will loop through all the rows in my table that have the language tag as English and then use the Microsoft Translation Service one by one, translate the text and put all that data back in that Excel file in my OneDrive. And while this flow is running, if you go to OneDrive and open that localization file, as the flow is running and picking up each and every row, it's starting to transform it into Spanish language right here. Just build it once for one language and then use that flow to translate all your text into another language of your choice. Once the flow completes, we'll go back to OneDrive and I will download my file. So I have my localization file ready for me to import it into the Power App. And right here in my app, I'll go to data sources, add data, and search for Excel and import data from Excel. I'll select my localization file. Once again, pick my table, which is called localization, and click connect. And this will now import that Excel file right here within the app. So the app has all that data of the translations available right here in this data source. Now, if I want to leverage this to translate my text, the first thing I need is the user's language, which I can get from the language function. Now, as part of this language function, it's important to note the list of supported languages. And once again, in the documentation, they've given us a trick here to find that. So I'm just going to copy this, go back to PowerApps, and here, just going to paste that. So if the user's language and locale has these combinations, or the script as well, it will showcase only these. These are the only ones that language supports. Now in my case, in my localized Excel file, I'm just using the language tag. That's the first two characters, EN and ES. If you look at the language function, it's returning me the language and the locale. So how do I just grab the first two characters? Well, very simple. On app.onStart, I've just written an extremely simple function here, wherein I'm setting the logged in user's language directly on start of the app in a variable. And in order for me to get just the first two characters from the language tag, I'm using the left function in PowerApps. So give me the first two characters from the language tag. And I'm transforming that to lowercase. And then I'm also using the coalesce function here. In case I don't get that for some reason, make sure you at least set it to English. Now, why did I do this? Well, because in my language tag, in my localized Excel file, I'm just maintaining those first two characters in lowercase. So EN, ES. Now that I have this variable called where current language, I will run app on start here because I'm in the edit mode of the app. Because I have my imported Excel file here in the app called localization, I can directly use the lookup function, look up my source, which is nothing but localization, where the language tag is equal to that variable. And let's say I want this text, the text that says to submit a help desk ticket. All I need is the text ID, which is submit ticket ID. So here, I'll add a second condition that says text ID is equal to submit ticket ID. And the result of this lookup function is a record. So from that record, give me the localized text. That is this text. So right here, if you observe, it's gone ahead and grabbed that text which says to submit a help desk ticket. And let's assume that the user's language is not English, but it's Spanish. So let me just hard code this just to see if it's working. I can quickly confirm here that it's gone ahead and grabbed my localized text now based on the language tag being ES. So I'm going to change this back to my current language. Now that I have this function here, what do I need to do for the rest of my app? I literally just have to repeat this for all the text in my app that I want to translate. So for example, if I want to translate to submit a help desk ticket, here's my text. Just going to change this to that same function. I want to change login as a help desk user. I'll change this. And for the text, login as a help desk user, here's my unique key or the ID. Just going to copy this, paste it right here. So that's how simple it is. And if the user's language changes, all of this will change along with it. And this is exactly what I have done in my app. This is the actual login screen of my app. If you look at it right here, I have that same formula here. Now I've added one more thing here. I've added a drop down in which I'm defining my own languages. So because my app just supports English and Spanish, I've just put a simple array here of English and Spanish. And the default value for this drop down, I have set it to that variable, which is my current language. So by default, for me, it's English. That's why this drop down shows English. And if I make a change here in this drop down, I am resetting that variable to the selected value in this drop down, which is the change that the user makes. So if I preview my app and if I change this to Spanish, all my text changes to Spanish. If I change it to English, it all changes to English. So I can default it to my user's language, and additionally, I can provide the user with an option to choose the language of their choice. Now, how difficult is it for me to add another language in here? I go back to my flow, run my flow again, and pick any other language. Let's say French. So I'm running this for French. I need to re-import that Excel file into my app. So once again, I will download this file, go back to my Power App. Important that I remove that imported Excel file and re-import it again. Import from Excel, pick the file, pick the table and connect. Now because I have another option for French, for the items property here, I will add a third option, which is French. If I preview my app, if I change this to French, completely transforms my entire app to French. Now the beauty of this approach is all the data is being held locally in memory. But what if I want to make this even more dynamic? If I go to data sources and go to add data, right here, if I search for Excel again, instead of importing from Excel, I can also connect to an Excel file using the Excel Online Business Connector. And with this connector, I have the option here of connecting to that Excel file either in OneDrive, or if it is in any group connected SharePoint site, or in any communication SharePoint site. So wherever this Excel file lives, you can connect to that Excel file. Important to ensure that you're giving the users at least read access on wherever that Excel file is. So in my case right now, it's in my OneDrive, so I need to make sure read access the users who are going to be utilizing this app. So let's say I want to point to that localized Excel file. I'll pick OneDrive for Business, pick OneDrive. I'll pick my file right here, and here is my localization table. Click connect. The key thing is that when you're connecting to an Excel file using the Excel Online Business Connector, you need to have a unique ID. So PowerApps can do that for you right out of the box. So I'll just say, okay, insert an auto-generated ID into that. I'll click connect. And this now will start connecting to that Excel file. The formulas that I had before was lookup, localization, and now it's connected to straight away to that OneDrive Excel file. But here I'm getting a delegation warning. And the reason is because when you work with Excel as a data source and the Excel file is living in OneDrive or SharePoint, in that case, you cannot have multiple queries. You can only have a single query. So I can't have AND operations and OR operations here. Otherwise, I'm going to run into delegation issues. And delegation means PowerApps will only be able to understand certain set of records in that Excel file. And that limit is defined by the delegation limit, which by default is 500. I can extend this to 2000. I cannot go beyond 2000. Now, ideally, you do not want to get any delegation warnings here so that you can add as much content as you want in that Excel file. So the key here is to reduce the queries. The user's language is something that doesn't change frequently. So I don't have to query the user's language for every text that I want to translate. Instead, what I can do is this. On the app on start, after I get the user's current language, I will go ahead and create a very simple collection. I'll create a collection, and the data in this collection, I will filter that localization table from my Excel Online file where the language tag is equal to the user's current language. So I'm already placing in the language filter beforehand. Now, if I was to go and just run this, if we look at this collection, it will only have data for the English language. That's because my current language that I've signed in is in English. If I go back to my screen again, all I have to do now is change my formula in cases of delegation warnings. So here's a delegation warning. What's the error here? I'm using two formulas. So what do? I look up the collection this time, the collection that I'm creating, and I don't need the formula for the language tag because the collection is already language specific. And I've done this for all the other controls. And if the user changes the language in this drop down, so on change, yes, I'm setting the language again, but I'm also reloading that collection depending upon the new language that the user has selected. So if I preview my app now and change the language to say French, you see everything gets transformed. And if we look at the data in this collection, it will only be French. And if I run my app in the browser, it's picking up the Spanish language here. And that's because my browser language is set to Spanish. And that's by default here. If I change this to French, it's going to transform all the text to French. If I change this to English, it's going to transform all the text to English. Now let's go ahead and change my browser language. So I'll go to Settings, Language, and put English right at the top. If I just refresh my browser window now, check out how it picked my default language, which is English. Now back to my app. What if I don't want to modify my app and just keep adding new languages to it? I don't want to go back to my app and make any changes. Can I do something like that? Well, right now my Excel file is already connected to OneDrive. So any new language translations that comes in, it's going to be there. The only thing that's hard-coded right now in the app is these languages. Now, I can get these languages from anywhere. I can get it from a SharePoint list maybe, wherein I'm maintaining all my languages for my app. So whenever I add a new language and I want it to show up in the app as an option for the user to select, I can drive it dynamically directly from my SharePoint list. Or I can also use the distinct formula. I already have that SharePoint list connected in my app. So for the items property, I'm going to change this to my list that's called app localization. On change of this dropdown, I'm trying to set the language to my variable. So here, instead of using selected.value, I'm going to use selected.title because title is the column in my SharePoint list that has that language code. And for the dropdown control, if I head over to advanced and make sure that under advanced settings for my dropdown control, the value that's showcasing in the dropdown is coming from that title column. So if I preview my app, once again, I can see my options here and check this out. As I change the language, it's translating everything for me on the fly. And this is coming from my SharePoint list. Now, if I go back to my OneDrive file, it's going to be something that's different. So if I go to localization again, here you will observe that I have a new column that got created. And this needs a unique GUID for it. That means this time if I run my flow, I need to ensure I have this in place as well. So I'll go back to my flow, edit my flow, and where we are adding data into a table, you see this new column? Go to expression and just use the GUID function. That's it. Click OK, click save. Once my flow is saved, I will go and run this. For a new language, let's say Hindi. So I'll put the language tag, which is HI, run the flow. The flow has started processing. You can see how the data is being added for the Hindi translations. I have made no changes to the app. And in order for me to add the Hindi language in that drop-down selector in my app, in my SharePoint list here, I'll click on New, add the code, which is HI for Hindi. That's right here. And here now in my Power App, without making any changes to the app or republishing, I have my language here now for Hindi. If I select this, it's going to transform the text for me on the fly. You can also have all your data in SharePoint, so all your translations. If you don't want to maintain it in Excel, you can even maintain it in SharePoint. So if you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching.